Heal Me by Embrace the Insectric on AO3. Chapter 10. Is he nice? Eri's question had Mirio pausing, a rare hesitation setting over him. He, Eri, and Eraserhead were on their way to the UA infirmary to formally introduce the young girl to Midoriya. She had accepted the request to meet the healer, but she still struggled with anxiety of meeting new people, though she had calmed significantly when Mirio had told her he'd taken off the day and accompany her. She still couldn't help but revert to her instincts of caution and wariness. He's honest, Mira weakly replied, and winced a bit, realizing how his answer lacked any of the comfort or assurance Eri had been seeking with her question. Eraser likes him? Honestly, he didn't know what to say about Midoriya. He had heard bits and pieces about the healer over the years from Sir Nighteye and All Might, mostly praised for his intelligence and quirk competency, which he certainly couldn't deny were an accurate assessment. He knew that they'd intended for Midoriya to be a resource for him, but after their first meeting, after he listened to the young boy discuss near-death experiences like they were nothing, and had been on the end of his cold, captive gaze and blunt examination, Mirio didn't know how to feel about him. Eraserhead had informed him that Midoriya was fitting in well with the UA community, quickly becoming a favorite of both students and faculty. President Mike enjoyed signing to the boy when they passed each other in the halls. Midnight had given her immature approval when she heard Midoriya defend her original costume design for its practicability and confirming the regulations relating to skin exposure for being absurd and restrictive. Apparently, Class 2A and Class 2B constantly fought over who would have Midoriya on standby for healing and observations if their training sessions ever overlapped. But even with the flattering reports, Mirio had still been surprised to hear that Eraserhead was willing to allow a meeting between Midoriya and Eri, given how protective the older hero was of her. He cares deeply for people around him, Aizawa shared with Eri, cutting through Mirio's spiraling thoughts. I think you'll like him, but you're also allowed to leave at any time, so if you feel uncomfortable, just let us know. Eri gave him a small nod, and let him know she understood, but said nothing more as they made their way to the infirmary. Recovery Girl had told them she was needed for her quirk at a local hospital with an overlooked emergency room and couldn't be present for the meeting, but that she trusted Midoriya to act alone and unsupervised in the infirmary. When they entered, they expected him to be alone, so they were surprised to see another student with him, seemingly uninjured and not there for healing. And you're sure he's going to wear them? The other student had her back to them, but Mirio recognized her as Mi Hatsumi, from her pink hair and preference of workshop gear over a proper uniform. She appeared to be accepting blueprint sheets from Midoriya. I've been trying to get that ticking time bomb to use one of my babies since I've met him. Katsuki promised he'd at least try the noise filter out for a while, Midoriya told her. The healer glanced away to make eye contact with Mirio and Eraserhead, nodding to acknowledge their arrival before holding up a finger to request a moment of patience. Thanks again for agreeing to build them from my design. Hatsumi, I know you're very particular about your babies. No problem. Your concept works. It's just too beautiful to pass up. And this is for your boyfriend. So I understand the desire for a personal contribution. She turned around, eyes scanning the blueprints, and excitedly until she noticed the arrival of other people in the room. She smiled and made her way out of the infirmary, calling out over her shoulder to Midoriya as she did so. I'll let you know when I'm finished. Midoriya waved as she left, and Mirio took a moment to notice that he wasn't wearing his lab coat, so the multitude of scars that littered his arms were on full display. Mirio hadn't seen the boy's arms yet. He wasn't particularly surprised by the sight of more scars after Midoriya had shown the web of damage to his torso. However, it was strange because normally the healer had his lab coat on. Midoriya never seemed ashamed of his scars, but the lab coat held things that were useful to him, like his notebook or snacks, so he was rarely seen not wearing it. You must be Eri, Midoriya greeted, directing a kind smile towards the young girl. He immediately kneeled, placing himself at her level, so she was no longer focusing to look up on him. It's very nice to meet you. My name is Izuku Midoriya. Hello, Eri politely replied, though she made no move to approach Midoriya. She remained by Eraser's side, her hands clutched in his and her body pressed against his legs. Midoriya didn't seem offended by the distance, and Mirio noted that he hadn't even offered out a hand towards the girl. Instead, he sat fully on the ground, crossing his legs as he wholeheartedly committed to carrying on the conversation on her weight. Eri observed him for a moment, her vigilant eyes scanning the stranger before her as she attempted to process whether she viewed him as a danger. Mirio could see that her eyes kept returning and settling on Midoriya's arm, curiosity tackling the scars that decorated them, and it seemed Midoriya had noticed this pattern as well. Are you looking at my scars? He questioned softly, though his smile never left his face. No. Eri gripped Eraser's hand tighter, almost moving behind him as her eyes widened with fear from being caught. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. It's fine. You can look at them. Midoriya quickly assured her, and he extended his arms in front of him, almost like he was inviting her to take a closer look. I quite like my scars. Do you know why? Why? Eri asked, her fear swiftly replaced by curiosity. They're signs of life, Midoriya told her. He raised a hand and let his finger graze some of the marks, tracing their forms. They're evidence that my body healed itself and it wants me to keep moving forward. Eri was quiet for a moment as her face twisted slightly and her nose scrunched, like she was silently debating something in her head. Eventually, she let go of Eraserhead and stepped away from the man, hesitantly moving closer to Midoriya, who continued to sit patiently on the ground before her. She stopped a few paces away from him and pulled up one of her sleeves, tilting her arm so Midoriya could have a better look of it. I have some too, Eri shared, a hesitant smile spreading on her face. Then that must mean you're a very strong little girl, the healer told her. Stronger than most heroes, I imagine. Heroes have nice quirks, Eri argued, expressing Tristan into something sadder. I don't have a nice quirk. I don't think quirks can be things like nice or mean, or good or bad, Midoriya said. I think that if you want your quirk to be nice and help people, then it will. He seemed to register the skepticism in Eri's expression and leaned towards like he was sharing a secret with only her. My boyfriend has an explosion quirk that can be pretty loud and scary. And sometimes he can be loud and scary too. So some people think he might grow up to be a villain. But he's going to be a hero who helps people because that's what he wants to be. He smiled as Eri's eyes seemed to light up with a sudden determined hope. What do you want to be, Eri? I want to be someone who helps people, she told him after a long moment of deliberation. Then that's what you'll be. Eri grinned, wide and bright, and a quick glance to her side showed Mirio and Eraser had a smile of their own on their face as he watched the interaction before them. Perhaps Mirio had been too quick to judge the healer, and he felt slightly guilty for not defending his character more. Do you help people? Eri asked, as she gradually inched closer to Midoriya, her words becoming more confident as she became more comfortable with the stranger in front of her. I try my best to, Midoriya admits. He stood, but only to receive a bag of what Mirio assumed were snacks or sweets from the infirmary desk before returning to his seat on the floor in front of Eri. It's taken a bit of practice with my quirk, but I'm pretty good at using it. Now, I want to practice too, but it's scary, Eri admitted, curiously eyeing the bag Midoriya had brought with him. I don't want to hurt anyone or lose anyone, but I want to help people, like Sir Nighteye. It suddenly dawned on Mirio how much it would benefit Midoriya if Eri were to gain better control of her quirk. If the only limitation of his healing was the damage it inflicted on his own body, and Eri could reverse that damage as it occurred, then he would theoretically be able to heal without restriction. The idea of combining the quirks seems like a fascinating plan in theory, but the thought suddenly had Mirio on edge. Surely they were helping Eri to train so she could gain better control of her quirk, so as to avoid it negatively affecting others by accident. But They weren't pushing her. She was only a child, one who was still recovering from the trauma she had experienced. If Midoriya saw potential in Eri's quirk for his own, which he likely already given his strategic tendencies, then he may try to convince all the right people to place Eri on a path that was more rigorous than she deserved. One day you will, Midoriya told her, and Mirio tensed, ready to interfere if the healer suggested anything extreme. But that day doesn't need to be today. It doesn't need to be tomorrow, or next week, or anytime soon, because practice takes time, and that's okay. Midoriya reached into the bag and pulled out a wrapped piece of candy, which he offered to Eri. And while you practice, you also need to take breaks and enjoy things like eating sweets and going on adventures. Eri looked at the candy with delight and nearly reached for it, but stopped and looked back at Eraser to seek permission before she did so. The older hero smiled and nodded his head, but held up a finger indicating she could only have one given how close it was to dinner time. Eri eagerly accepted the offered treat, shyly thanking Midoriya as she did so. In the meantime, heroes like me and Eraserhead will take care of things, Mira assured her, as she unwrapped her candy, prompting Eri to look back at him and smile. Did you take breaks? She asked, turning to look at Midoriya as he unwrapped his own piece of candy. Not many, the healer admitted, tossing the sweet into his mouth with a thoughtful look on his face. But I really wish I had. So maybe you could do that for me. He looked at Eri with a seriousness in his eyes as if he were handing out a mission assignment to a professional hero. Could you go on adventures and eat sweets and have fun for me? Would that help you? Eri asked. It would help me a whole lot, Midoriya replied. Then I promise. Are you free tomorrow night? Izuku nearly jumped out of his skin as Shinso suddenly appeared by his side. He was finishing up lingering paperwork in the infirmary and had been entirely in his own world, so disconnected that it had been simple for Shinso to sneak up behind him at his desk. He looked at the boy, who seemed far too pleased with himself over surprising Izuku, as he took a seat on one of the empty beds. Free for what? Izuku asked as he turned back to the computer to continue his work. Yes or no, please. I am theoretically free tomorrow night, Izuku answered, rolling his eyes at Shinso's stubbornness. Why do you ask? So there's this band I've been following for years now, and they're doing a show in a club in Mitsu tomorrow around midnight. They're letting you leave campus by yourself to see a concert that late? Izuku asked, looking away from his work only to see Shinso's sheepish grin in response to the question. Izuku sighed, a frown settling on his face. You're sneaking out, aren't you? Listen, this band hardly does performances in Japan, let alone this close to the school, Shinso reasoned, hands waving in the air as if gesturing helped to prove his point. It'll be an insult not to sneak out and see them. And you're asking me to be your accomplice because... I normally hit up concerts with Jiro, but this band's not her style, Shinso explained. As Kaminari, but I already see him all the time, and honestly, I just wanted to spend more time with you. Izuku's mind snagged to those last few words, and he turned to Shinso with a questioning look. Are you... I'm not flirting with you, Shinso quickly promised. Hands raised in a pacific gesture. As much as I like to piss off Bakugou, I respect that much. Doesn't Yue have a curfew? Izuku asked, now completely distracted from his work. Do you have a curfew? Shinso asked, in lieu of an answer. I respect that Toshinori likes me to come home by a certain hour, Izuku replied carefully. But no, I don't exactly have a set curfew. You moved away when you were 5, right? Shinso checked as he jumped up from the bed, moving so that he stood in front of Izuku. He put his hand on Izuku's shoulder, lightly shaking the boy. I bet you've been dying to explore more than just the campus since you've gotten back, and I really think you'd enjoy this music's band. I swear you'll enjoy yourself. I don't know, Shinso, Izuku said, glancing over at his work that he still had to do. It reminded him of all the assignments he wanted to work on back at home, His Island instructors practically expected him to finish his work ahead of schedule, and there were a few designs for support gear that he wanted to fine tune before he sent them to Melissa and Hatsumi for second opinions. The concert would be late at night, which wasn't exactly the normal time to do coursework, but Izuku had always been a night owl and a workaholic. Not to mention, if they were caught, then there would most likely definitely be hell to pay. He was surprised Shinso was willing to take such a risk considering his placement in the Hero Coast was recent and likely still prohibitory. Izuku could have his internship terminated and be sent back to Aizawa Island. As a punishment, he barely even wanted to consider. No one will know we're gone, Shinso promised, in an attempt to discourage any worries. We'll leave and get back while everyone's asleep. I feel like I'm already on thin ice because of that viral video thing, Izuku murmured. That was like a week ago, and you didn't even get in trouble for that, he argued, sighing after a moment as Izuku continued to be unconvinced. Listen, if we do get caught, then you're allowed to say I used my quirk on you and tricked you into going. You know I'll never lie about you using your quirk on me, Izuku told him, firm yet caring in his response in a way that brought a small smile to Shinso's face. Izuku let out a sigh and watched as Shinso's expression now brightened, the other boy realizing he's won. Fine, I'll go. Izuku was suddenly a prideful person, likely a result of growing up with Katsuki as a major influence in his life. But he knew when to admit he was wrong. So, as he and Shinso walked through the cool and silent streets of Matsuki after attending an undoubtedly great concert, he felt praised to be voicing his thoughts on the matter. We should do this again, Izuku admitted, though he quickly tackled on the adenium when he caught sight of something mischievous in Shinso's eyes. But I could do without the sneaking around next time, thank you. I told you this would be fun, Shinso replied, a lazy grin on his face as they walked. Shinso had already declared that he'd escort Izuku home before returning to campus, but neither boy was really in a rush to return home. Have you and Bakugou been able to go out anywhere? We go out sometimes for food or just spend time together, Izuku told him. The same reason he gave most people when they ask what he did with Katsuki. We're both pretty busy, so it's difficult. But it's definitely an improvement from being long distance. Maybe once you graduate, you can move back to Japan and work here? Shinso suggests. I bet UA would love to have another healing quirk user. Then you could be close to Bakugou and whatever the hell he decides he's gonna do. Izuku had to hold back a bitter laugh, so he wouldn't ruin the peace of the moment that had settled between him and Shinso on their walk back. What Shinso didn't know was that his suggestion was something of an ongoing dispute for Izuku. Of course he would like to come back to Japan. Of course he would. Japan was where he was born. It was where Katsuki lived. It was where all of his new friends he had made in UA lived. Sure, he had friends on Island, and he cared deeply for Marissa and her father, but Island was just one place, with a limited population made mostly of researchers. He would absolutely jump at the chances to return to Japan. The problem was that a few of those researchers and a few very wealthy investors who funded their work and had funded Izuku's work and education and training for the last decade didn't want him to leave. And they had some pretty serious contracts that could legally keep him where they wanted him. It was a legal leash that could easily keep him bound to that island for the rest of his life, and the fact weighed on Izuku every day. But he didn't say anything of this to Shinso, not even allowing his tone to atone for the disheartening realities floating in his head. It is nice, though, Izuku murmured instead, voice light and unaffected as he trained it to be for conversations like this. He opened his mouth again to suggest a different conversation topic when suddenly registered a strange noise. The interrupted the quiet stillness of the very early morning. He stopped. Shinso stopped with him after a few steps. Did you hear that? Hear what? Shinso cut himself off as he heard the noise as well. As the two fell silent, the noise became clearer, and it registered with both of them at once that it was the sound of someone groaning. It was the sound of someone groaning in pain. Shinzo and Izuku shared a quick glance before moving swiftly and quieting down the empty streets, ears straining to pick up the noise and identify the source. Eventually found it down a narrow alleyway that branched off the main street. The alleyway was dark, the light from the main road barely reaching it. The first thing Izuku registered was a familiar metallic scent of blood in the air, until his eyes finally adjusted and he saw a young woman kneeling on the ground covered in red. Please, the woman pleaded, clutching her abdomen as she slumped against the wall of the alleyway. Somebody please help. That's a lot of blood, Shinzo noted. Uselessly, though. Izuku couldn't blame the observation, as he had his fair share of accidents and could admit this was a lot of blood. Izuku quickly made his way towards the woman, vaguely registering Shinzo's warning to be careful. He kneeled beside her, eyes scanning to identify where exactly the blood was coming from. Please help me, she pleaded again. Some asshole jumped me with a knife. It hurts. It's going to be okay, Izuku assured her, voice calm and firm to keep her from panicking further. Can you move your hand? So I can see the injury. The woman shakily moved her hands from her abdomen, and Izuku moved his own closer, gently putting at the blood-soaked fabric of her shirt to see the incision. He wondered for a moment if the dim light was playing tricks on him, or if maybe he was far more tired than he had been, because he swore as he pulled the fabric he saw no wounds, and only more blood. Where's the... Midoriya! Wow, that girl was right. Izuku's eyes shut up. The woman's voice had changed, and Izuku found himself staring in a different set of eyes than he had been before. These were gold, with pupils like... And Izuku watched as the rest of the woman's face seemed to melt away like it had made of wax to reveal another person. A girl with messy blonde buns and a blush on her blood-spattered cheeks now sat before Izuku, and she smiled wide to reveal sharp canines. Izuku felt the blood in his own veins freeze as he felt the sharp edge of a knife press against his throat, and the girl giggled, a light-hearted and entirely inappropriate nose for such a moment. You are so cute, healer boy, huh? Okay, so the way Midoriya talks to Eri, I love that. Love that so much. It is adorable. The way he kneels down at her level as to be equal with her. It's not just so she's not like constantly looking up and like hurting her neck or hurting her eyes. No, it's an equal thing, right? It's a psychological thing. When you're talking to kids, it's why some people bend down. Sometimes they do it unconsciously, sometimes they do it consciously. I do it consciously because I know if I'm bent down, the child is more likely to listen to me, understand me, and feel comfortable and safe around me. It shows them that I'm listening, I'm there for them, and I'm giving them my full undivided attention. So I just love that there's that like little detail there. Can we talk about Island and all the researchers there? And it is really messed up how basically Izuku is tied for life there, whether he likes it or not, which clearly he doesn't like it. He wants to move back to Japan, but he can't because, well, you know, he's tied there. And it is so messed up because technically speaking, he never signed anything. It was his mom, right? And I'm not blaming Inko. Love Inko. And I'm pretty sure it even talks about in the fanfic that he was 5 and everything was happening so soon and they didn't realize the implications. Basically, they were taken advantage of is what happened. It's heavily implied that they were just taken advantage of. They saw them and they took advantage of them, and it's upsetting. Also, if you guys thought this was gonna be a like slice of life, you know, fanfic, y'all are wrong. Toga pops up. Love that. I love Toga. Toga's like my favorite villain. She is always my favorite villain. I always love seeing her. As always, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, have a wonderful day or night. Join our community Discord server, link is in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.